Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be connected with you today. I'll just get started. I hope the construction outside isn't going to distract you too much or get in the way of my speaking. I wanted to welcome you and thank you for being part of the GEF Global Biodiversity Framework Early Action Support Project. Welcome to the 8th webinar in our series, Guidance for the Early Action Support Project, Overview of Available Technical Support and Opportunities for Feedback. My name is Tanya McGregor, and I'm a Program Management Officer with the EAS, or the Early Action Support Project, with UNEP, and I'll be facilitating today's session. Today's webinar will focus on the cohesive technical support package available through the EAS project to help you take action towards Annex 3 and Decision 15/6 and other commitments made at CBD COP15. Presentations will summarize the guidance, tools, and capacity development opportunities available under the 4 project components, which are alignment of national biodiversity targets, assessment of monitoring systems, policy and institutional alignment, and biodiversity finance. The webinar also focuses on the breadth of regional and topical knowledge and best practices that countries are developing. We will share opportunities for you to provide feedback on guidance materials based on your experiences, and we'll initiate conversations about South-South exchange. We are likely all Zoom experts now, but I would like to provide some brief reminders. If you encounter technical issues, to help you resolve them, send a private Zoom message to Anthony Kamau, whose email is on the screen. Please do not use the group chat for this. And your microphones will be muted to help ensure our speakers can be heard clearly. We encourage your participation. To ask a question, you have 2 options. You can type your question in the Zoom chat box as the questions come up during the presentation or during the question and answer session, or you can virtually raise your hand in the control panel. We will then ask you to open your microphone during the Q&A session. Finally, we have a webinar page where you can access today's presentations and recordings. We will also share them by email after the series concludes. So I think there's another message in the chat. Also, to access past webinar sessions, you can navigate the MBSAP forum webpage. My colleague is dropping the link in the chat as well. So here is today's agenda with the 3 presentations on the project components. So the first is an overview of technical support for component 1 and 3, alignment of MBSAPs and/or national biodiversity targets with the GBF and policy and institutional alignment, and review for achieving coherence with the GBF. So the presenter for this will be Patrick Chesney, who is the EAS technical support consultant with UNEP. And for the second part of today's webinar will be an overview of technical support for component 2, which is an assessment of national monitoring systems and development of monitoring action plans. And the presenter is Philip Bubb, Senior Program Officer with UNEP WCMC. Thirdly, we'll have an overview of technical support for component 4 on biodiversity finance related activities, and that will be presented by Pierre Lanfranco, who is a global technical environmental finance analyst with BioFin. During the discussion session, you will have the opportunity to interact with technical experts on each of the 4 project components. Ask questions, share your experiences on progress towards realizing national commitments to the CBD. We encourage you to make the most of this time to share your thoughts, including any feedback on the materials currently available. Please also note that we have developed feedback forms for many of these guidance materials. We encourage you to share your feedback and comments through the forums. This is an excellent opportunity for us to hear from you about your expectations so that we can keep improving the guidance and support that we provide. These feedback forms, in addition to the materials themselves, can be found in the technical support booklet we are dropping in the chat. You can find the links in the feedback form and the technical support booklet, which is now in the chat. Note that depending on the status of progress in your country, it may not be necessary to use all of the resources, but rather you can choose to customize your own support package by picking and choosing the materials and tools that best suit your needs. The types of support provided under this project and explored today include those for component 1, namely one-on-one technical support, technical review, guidance documents, webinars, e-learning courses, tools, and peer-to-peer learning in line with South-South cooperation. The full list of opportunities are shared in the technical support booklet, which is available in the chat. Today, you'll hear about many of the different guidance and resource materials being made available through the EAS project. We're also interested in the expertise you have to share. Are you exploring innovative approaches for target alignment, monitoring, policy coherence, biodiversity finance, whole of government approach, or other related topics? Do you have specialized regional knowledge, skills, innovative solutions, or good practices that you would like to share with countries in your region? Are you interested in sharing your experiences through case studies, brown bag dialogues, or one-on-one discussions with other countries looking for your recommendations? Please let us know, drop a message in the chat or send us an email. We would like to promote good practices and support or facilitate collaborative learning and knowledge sharing across countries. As part of this project, we aim to strengthen peer-to-peer learning. Peer-to-peer learning can provide an effective way of sharing good practices, knowledge, expertise, technologies, innovative solutions, and resources that benefit all involved parties. It can connect countries that face common challenges and share similar characteristics, such as economic and social conditions and language, making the exchanges more relevant and adaptable. It can also strengthen South-South cooperation in line with GBF Target 20 and COP Decision 15/8 on capacity building and development and technical and scientific cooperation. Types of peer-to-peer learning that we are exploring include brown bag discussions led by countries with topical or regional expertise, case studies on best practices at the national and regional level, webinars on good practices across countries, one-to-one knowledge exchanges between countries through email or online meetings. And please let us know which of these types of learnings you would be most interested in. You can drop a message in the chat. So I think now we're moving to our first Menti poll of the webinar. So you can take a look at that's dropped in the chat. And I think the slide will be showing up on the screen momentarily. So Menti, for those of you who are not familiar with it, Menti is a platform that enables people to share their responses to questions and to see the results in real time. So you can scan the QR code that will soon appear on the screen, or you can go to https www.menti.com and enter the code on the top of the screen. So we'll just give you a moment, and we're just waiting for the screen to show up on our screens right now.
Apologies, just give me a second, trying to figure this out.
Sure, thanks. Just bear with us as we get started with the Menti, sharing the Menti poll. Okay, so you can see here the QR code that is appearing on the screen. So if you can scan that code with your camera, or you can again go to the webpage for www.menti.com and enter the code that's at the top of the screen here, which is 59393194. So if you we'll just give you a moment to get to this page, and then we'd like your inputs in response to this question. And just to make sure you're aware, the responses are anonymous and aim to gather general information from you on this, on the types of peer-to-peer learning mechanisms that you would be most interested in. So far we've got one response, and that is for case studies on best practices at the national and regional level. 2 responses on that. Okay, anybody else? Any different views? Okay, webinars on good practices across countries. And I just need to change my screen. And 2 on, okay, so we've got an even, okay, knowledge exchanges between countries through email or meetings. That's showing up as the most popular option right now. Oh, it's tied with case studies, and close behind is webinars on good practices. So I think the only one that we don't have any interest expressed for is brown bag discussions led by countries with topical or regional expertise. So this is useful for us to know, so we can concentrate as much as possible on creating more opportunities for knowledge exchanges, and also through the provision of appropriate case studies that will be helpful in supporting your work. And continue the webinars, it looks like. Okay, perhaps we can move on to the next question in the interest of time. Okay, so the next question is, what types of knowledge or good practices might your country be interested in sharing? So there's options here that pertain to each of the 4 project components, undertaking a whole of government approach and regional knowledge. So please select the types of knowledge that you would be interested in here. And we'll just wait for some of the responses to come in. Got 1 so far on good regional practices, 2. Okay, 1 on good practices on biodiversity finance, and good practices on whole of government approach, policy coherence as well. Okay. So far regional practices, whole of government approach, and biodiversity finance is almost in lead, but it's still regional practices that is taking the lead. Okay. So we have a good cross section here. So the ones that are not showing up. Oh, I see someone has mentioned that only 1 option is available. I think it may be that you can only choose 1 option. I'm not sure. But it is to give us an idea of what may be most important for you. If you're interested in more than 1 option, I'm not sure. I guess the Menti is not set up to allow more than 1 option. But yeah, so unfortunately we don't have that option available, it seems like, but at least we can see that among the people attending so far that there's a real interest in good regional practices, as well as some of the other elements that are relevant and will be discussed today around biodiversity finance, policy coherence, and a whole government approach. Not so much interest reflected on good practices on monitoring or target alignment for now. Perhaps we can move to the next slide. And so the prompt is, what types of knowledge or good practices is your country interested in learning about? So this question is similar to the one before, but it pertains to what you'd be interested in learning about versus what types of knowledge you'd like to share. So I hope that distinction is clear, and we'll just give you a moment to respond on this. Okay, so we've got interest in learning about whole of government approach, as well as biodiversity finance and good practices on monitoring. Okay, so somewhat similar to the last slide, but more of a focus here on whole of government approach. Okay, so I think maybe in the discussion question, it'll be useful also to unpack a little bit what kinds of good practices or what kinds of information you're really looking for in respect to whole of government approach, as well as these other elements. Okay, thank you all for your feedback on the Mentimeter. We can now proceed with the presentations. And we'll be starting with an overview of technical support for components 1 and 3. So the presentation will be given by Patrick Chesney, who is a EAS technical support person with UNEP. And we're just getting the slides on the screen to share with you for this. So let's see. And so I think that'll be over to you for now, Patrick. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tanya. Hello all, good morning from Georgetown, Guyana, and welcome to this presentation. Slide 2 will show you what the focus is of the component 1, which is on the rapid review of national biodiversity strategies and action plans for alignment with the GBF. So you can see on this slide, the top half, one would say, of the intervention logic, presenting the outcome statement, indicators, and the outputs. On slide 3, this component 1 is oriented around completion of Annex 1 of the decision 15/6, which requests parties to align national biodiversity targets with the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework and to submit them by COP16, which is less than 9 months away from now. On the next slide, we will go directly to decision 15/6. Annex 1 provides a template for submission of national targets as part of NBSAPs for completion by COP16. The information requested can be submitted through the CBD online reporting tool. And I think the URL is there. We will be dropping both of these links in the chat. That is the link to decision 15/6, as well as the CBD online reporting tool. Given that COP16 is less than 9 months away, there is need for urgent action for all parties to assess and increase alignment between the national biodiversity targets and the GBF. Now on the next slide, we are going to delve deeper into the template on the Annex 1, highlighting the information that parties submit. Here we can see the box for countries to input each of their updated national biodiversity targets and the degree of alignment between the target and the global goal or target. In Annex 1, we have what the degree of alignment between the target and global target is all about. On slide 6, the next slide, the template provides an area to input policy measures and indicators that pertain to a given national target. Following that, on slide 7, you can see how the template also provides opportunities to list non-state actor commitments towards the national target and information on means of implementation. Bearing in mind that non-state actors, they are not parties to the convention, and so they have an important role to play in providing support to the process. Finally, on slide 8, there's a section for parties to include indicators that will be used to assess the global goals or targets. And we can look towards decision 15/5 on the monitoring framework for the framework to see what the indicators are. Okay, now let's take a look at support available under this component on slide 9. We can see various images there. And I will now read to you on slide 10, the whole range of products that we have. The intention, of course, is for you to choose those that are most useful to you It is not necessary that you use all of them. Many of these technical guidance documents have been prepared as interim documents with Google Forms provided for submission of feedback. And we welcome your comments and would like to hear from you on how we could better adapt these materials to best meet your needs. So we have Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework Targets with Guidance Notes. That's available now. Annex 1 of Decision 15/6 Mechanisms for Planning, Monitoring, Reporting, and Review. That's available now. Interim Technical Guidance to Support National Biodiversity Target Alignment. That's available now, and feedback can be submitted here. We have National NBSAP Target Similarity Assessment Summaries, including 17 pilots available now with more forthcoming. We also have interim technical guidance to support gender mainstreaming, available now, and feedback can be submitted here. We have interim technical guidance to support stakeholder engagement. That's available now, and feedback can be submitted here. A publication on gender equality, women's empowerment, and leadership in national biodiversity planning and reporting. That's available now. And 3 technical guidance documents coming later this year. 1, guidance document on ensuring whole of society approach in implementing the new NBSAPs and Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. A checklist of key elements, thematic and cross-cutting issues that should be a part of the updated NBSAPs. And finally, a guide on undertaking rapid assessment of existing NBSAPs, including undertaking gap analysis of NBSAPs with new targets. So that's the technical guidance that we have, and indeed a wide range of products. Note that this list is subject to change. You can also find this list with links to the guidance and the feedback forms in the chat, which I believe my colleague has just dropped in the chat. On slide 11, the next slide, we also have some great webinars. And I'm glad to, in Monty Poll, that webinar is a form of support that you have indicated support for. And these webinars provide support around component 1, including ones on aligning national biodiversity targets to the GBF, integrating human rights and gender considerations into NBSAPs, strengthening NBSAPs by integrating capacity building and technical and scientific cooperation, and national target alignment, tools, and technical support. Ladies and gentlemen, the next slide shows tools and knowledge exchange opportunities. This includes the webinars in the last slide, plus NBSAP Forum, data reporting tool for MEAs, popularly known as DART, and an e-learning module known as Gender Equality, Women's Empowerment, and Leadership in National Biodiversity Planning and Reporting. Now, on the next slide, permit me to invite everyone to open up Menti again. You can use the QR code or go to menti.com and use the code at the top of the screen. So we'll just wait a minute for that to appear on the screen. So the question is, I hope everybody can see the screen now. The question is, what types of additional support are you looking for on target alignment on the component 1? So I'll give everyone a few moments to respond. Your responses could be different topics that you're curious about, or support would help you achieve the project objectives. Your responses could also be your preferred capacity strengthening modality, such as more webinars, peer-to-peer exchanges, or others. I invite you now to indicate your preferences. So we'll give you another minute to begin responding. Someone has indicated poor connection. Okay, the responses should be loading soon for those who are able to connect and respond. I'm so sorry, Mr. Kiri, that you're not hearing well. I hope that improves. Anthony has put a message in the chat suggesting that you try rejoining. Okay, we may come back to this one, but in the interest of time, we're going to proceed with the presentation. On the next slide, we know that many countries have started engaging stakeholders towards a whole of government and whole of society approach around component one. We're waiting for the slides to load again. Just to indicate that some of your countries have begun to conduct analyses on alignment between the national biodiversity targets and the GBF goals and targets. And others are in the process of developing updated targets. We'd love to take a moment to hear from you. What work are you doing now? Do you have any good practices, experiences, or recommendations to share? Feel free to respond in the chat or raise your hand to respond. So we will be paying attention to those who wish to speak about the work that they're doing, or if you're happy to just share those responses in the chat. Okay. There's a question in the chat. Do you have any guidelines and tools in Russian? For the NCs, we need guidelines in Russian, please. Give the link to download. Thank you very much for that response, which we will take into consideration and provide response to you. Anthony has reminded everyone, in case you experience any technical issues, please contact me. And that's Anthony Kamau with a private message in Zoom chat. Ladies and gentlemen, in the interest of time, we will now turn to component 3. As these two components, that's component 1 and component 3, can be considered as complementary. Now, component 3 focuses on policy and institutional alignment and review for coherence with the GBF. The outcome for component 3 is the identification of action for policy alignment and coherence with nature-related sectors. Some outputs can include completing a rapid review of existing national policies related to biodiversity and their alignment with the GBF, developing an aligned whole-of-government approach that captures the values of biodiversity, developing a prioritized action plan for policy coherence, and other early actions related to policy alignment and coherence. On the next slide, the GBF highlights the need for cohesive and wide-ranging adoption and implementation of the GBF, stating that this is a framework for all, for the whole of government and the whole of society. Its success requires political will and recognition at the highest level of government, and relies on action and on cooperation by all levels of government and by all actors of society. And in this, we can find in decision 15/4. On the next slide, slide 17, we're reminded that policy coherence and alignment are critical for action across all 4 goals and 23 targets of the GBF. And as I highlighted in target 14, which reads as follows: ensure the full integration of biodiversity and its multiple values into policies, regulations, planning and development processes, poverty eradication strategies, strategic environmental assessments, environmental impact assessments, and, as appropriate, national accounting within and across all levels of government and across all sectors, in particular those with significant impacts on biodiversity, progressively aligning all relevant public and private activities and fiscal and financial flows with the goals and targets of this framework. End of quote of target 14. On the next slide, slide 18, the need for alignment across policies, sectors, and actors is also highlighted in decision 15/6, which states synergies among NBSAPs and the planning and implementation mechanisms of the other biodiversity-related conventions, Rio conventions, and other relevant multilateral environment agreements and the Sustainable Development Goals should be identified and utilized to maximize efficiency and coherence. Secondly, the decision also encourages parties to adopt the revised or updated NBSAPs as policy and /or legal instruments, and to mainstream them or elements thereof with broader strategies and plans such as national sustainable development plans, national development plans, poverty reduction strategies, and other relevant national sectoral and cross-sectoral plans in line with national circumstances and priorities. On slide 19, the GBF does not provide a definition of policy coherence. However, we can look to the Global Environment Facility's document, Framing Policy Coherence for the GEF for support. And the link is available. This document states that policy coherence for development is an approach to integrate environmental objectives into domestic policymaking by fostering synergies, maximizing benefits, and managing trade-offs across economic, social, and environmental policy areas, and by balancing domestic policy objectives with commitments under the multilateral environment agreements. A key step towards biodiversity policy coherence is to identify and capitalize on synergies between related MEAs and the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, as it captures globally agreed goals for ensuring living in harmony with nature. On the next slide, and ladies and gentlemen, we come to the end of this presentation. As mentioned earlier, there's also considerable linkage between component 1 and component 3, as revised or updated national targets should take into account the whole suite of national policies and institutions. Similarly, the final national biodiversity targets should be embedded into policies and institutions across the government and society. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, Annex 1 of Decision 15/6 encourages countries to list A, main policy measures or actions to achieve national biodiversity targets, and B, any overlaps or links between this national target and targets or commitments submitted as non-state actor commitments to the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. On the next slide, for technical guidance, we have a wide range of products that aim to support varied needs. As you can see, available technical guidance includes in our list, and you must bear with me as well, I'm having some minor technical difficulties. Interim mini manuals for policy alignment with each of the 23 GBF targets, that's available now. A workbook on integrated spatial planning, that's available now. Also available using landscape approaches in National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Planning. We have interim technical guidance to support gender mainstreaming, which is available now when we invite feedback here. And interim technical guidance to support stakeholder engagement, that's also available now, and we invite feedback here. There's a policy brief on integrated spatial planning for sustainable development, a policy brief on whole of society approach to implementing the GBF, and spatial dossiers on national policy alignment, and those are all coming in this first quarter. Coming in the third quarter are case studies on policy alignment with the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework and guidelines and using SEEA to assess policy scenarios that would contribute to the GBF goals and targets. And coming during the year, we have guidance documents on ensuring whole society approach in implementing the new NBSAPs and the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, and a checklist of key policies related to elements of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework and options for policy coherence. Note again that this list is subject to change. You can also find this list with links to the guidance and the feedback forms in the chat. The next slide shows the tools and knowledge exchange that are or will be available, including the following. Data reporting tool for MEAs, otherwise known as DART, which is available now. Integrated Spatial Planning self-paced course, which is available now. Coming in the first quarter, a webinar on policy and institutional alignment and developing GBF-aligned action plans for policy coherence, as well as a seminar using UNBL for integrated spatial planning. During the third quarter, there will be an e-learning module on applying SEEA to contribute to GBF goals and targets. Now, ladies and gentlemen, again, we would like everyone to open up Menti again. Let's hope we have a different result this time. You can use the QR code to go to menti.com and use the code on the screen. The question is, what types of additional support are you looking for around policy and institutional alignment under component 3? And I'd like to give everyone a few moments to respond. Similar to before, your responses could be different topics that you are curious about or that would help you achieve the proposed project objectives. Your responses could also be your preferred capacity strengthening modality, such as more webinars, peer-to-peer exchanges, and others. So we'll give a few moments for those responses to load. Okay. We would like to hear a bit more from you, or about how you are taking steps towards component 3 in your country. Have any of your countries gotten started on component 3 as yet? If not, what types of activities are you planning under this component? Ladies and gentlemen, we invite you to place those responses in the chat in the interest of time. That's the end of my presentation, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening. And I'd now like to hand the floor as we speak back to Tanya for continuation of the webinar. Back to you, Tanya.
Thanks very much, Patrick. Thanks for the presentation. If there's any immediate questions on Patrick's presentation, please raise your hand or add a question in the chat. We will have an open discussion session at the end of the presentations where you can ask any other questions. I see there's some more general questions popping up in the chat, I think, around the project as a whole. Okay. All right. I think maybe we can save those for the end and allowing us to, which will just allow us to take the time for the other presentations now. And to note that after this webinar, we will upload a document with the questions and responses from experts on the webinar webpage. So we will get back to you on these questions. So I'd like to continue with the next presentation, which is on the overview of technical support for component 2, and which will be delivered by Philip Bubb, who is the Senior Program Officer with UNEP WCMC. Over to you, Philip. Thanks.
Hello. Good morning, good afternoon to everybody. So yes, I'm Philip Bubb, a Senior Program Officer at the UNEP World Conservation Monitoring Centre. I'm going to be introducing for about 10 minutes the guidance supports that we're leading the development of developing national monitoring system plans as part of component 2 of the Early Action Support Project. And I'm presenting this as well on behalf of a team of us at UNEP WCMC that are supporting national monitoring capacity, including Natasha Ali, Roberto Correa, and Mateo Vukalic. And there's an email address there, which where you can contact us, and we'll share that again at the end. So in this presentation, I'm just going to introduce some of the material, the materials that we're developing to support national monitoring system plans. First, I'll introduce a draft guidance document, which is the production of this is being led by UNEP WCMC with UNEP and UNDP and the Secretariat of the CBD. And then I'll introduce some other guidance that's being developed. Have the next slide, please. So under the Early Action Support Project Component 2, the aim of it is to support the development of plans for national monitoring systems. I think it's useful to recognise that in the project, we're not saying you have to have a full national monitoring system. It's to have a plan for how you would want to develop your monitoring system, including the indicators that you'll be using for reporting. So the materials that we are developing to help with this is the guidance documents and some technical tools, webinars such as this one, technical review of draft materials of yours on monitoring system plans, and also some one-to-one technical support. Next slide, please. So we have produced a draft guidance for developing plans for national monitoring systems, which I'll introduce more in a minute. Hopefully you've already received this as partners in the Early Action Support Project. And we very much welcome your comments and feedback on this draft so that we can improve it. There's a link there, which Anthony's also put in the chat. Thank you for accessing the document and a form for giving feedback. We'd really welcome that by 15th of February so that the next month we can work on the next version. Next slide, please. So this guidance document for developing plans for national monitoring systems has these sections. There's a section on relevant CBD COP15 decisions about monitoring and reporting for the global biodiversity framework, and in particular the monitoring framework to support that. And the guidance includes then an introduction to the monitoring framework, what its purpose is, and the development steps that are happening for it, and a little bit about its content. But hopefully in the future there will be more information available on the indicators as well. Then there's a section on useful information for developing a monitoring system plan, some definitions, and some sort of tips, and then we have a section on suggested steps for developing a national monitoring system plan. So we tried to think of, for you in your circumstances as a country, to implementing this project and developing a monitoring system plan, what would be the steps involved, and some useful resources for that. But we really welcome your feedback on whether those steps are appropriate or we could improve that. There's also in the guidance something we call an indicator specification template, which is a template for describing an indicator in terms of its name and who's responsible for it, its method, and where the data comes from and how you calculate it, and so on. And this can be useful for further detailing the indicators you have and identifying gaps for having them ready for use, and capacity needs for that. And then there's a section in the guidance on resources, further tools, literature, and so on. Next slide, please. So component 2 of the GBF-EAS Action Support Project has, in your contracts, has 2 subcomponents or outputs. 2.1 gaps in existing monitoring systems are identified, and then 2.2 is a monitoring action plan is developed. And in the guidance document, we suggested actually we can integrate those 2 outputs into a single kind of project form or workflow or activity within the project. So make it a sort of continuous projects, sub-projects as it were, within the overall one, to identify gaps and produce a plan. Next slide, please. And these are just some of the sort of considerations for development of indicators for NVSAPs that are in the guidance to introduce the content. So first, consult the Global Biodiversity Framework's monitoring framework, in particular the headline indicators, become familiar with them, and where possible, the headline indicators should be used for your reporting. Then it's good practice to define your targets and then the indicators to how to measure the targets, although they might happen together at the same time. So help you have measurable targets, and recognize that complex targets may need more than one indicator, and that data to track progress needs to be produced consistently over time. It's not just a one-off study. And indicators need a responsible agency and funding. It won't be enough just to identify in the document that we want this indicator. It needs to have a responsible agency and funding to produce and report it, and for there to be long-term investment in data production systems, which often is a weakness. Next slide, please. And to allow measurement of progress towards goals and targets, an indicator needs to have a baseline measurement or reference period, sort of where you're starting from. And the COP decision 15.5 decides to use the period from 2011 to 2020 for this, where data is available, so there may be some flexibility on that. Next slide, please. And In the guidance, we suggest a definition for what a national monitoring system is, but it will be flexible according to your national circumstances. But we suggest a nationally mandated system for the production of data and indicators and reports to periodically measure and monitor national progress in the implementation of the conventional biological diversity. And that system may be led by a government body or another mandated organisation. Next slide, please. And we also offer some sort of suggestions on the scope of a monitoring system and action plan. How ambitious is it? And that there could be perhaps a monitoring system which at the most basic level A is just to calculate the indicators as need for your CBD national reports in 2026 and 2029 using data available at that time. Or B, to create or strengthen your existing systems, to have a coordinated system to produce indicators to support implementation and reporting, so more consistently over time. And C could be to create or strengthen a whole national information system for reports and indicators that you need for all your biodiversity relevant international agreements and so on. Next slide, please. One of the resources that WCMC has produced to help with this type of work is an information system framework diagram and approach. And there's a package of materials of guidance and templates for doing this on this link here, which is also in the guidance document. Next slide, please. And in the guidance, the suggested steps section, it introduces these 4 sort of stages. One, to prepare a kind of a project, as mini projects to produce a monitoring system action plan. Who's going to lead this? What resources do you have? What's your timetable in your team? And have government support for that. Then number 2, to look at indicated definition for each NBSAP goal or target or action one by one. And then 3, produce a delivery plan for each nationally selected indicator. Some indicators may already be available, like great. Others you may need to develop new ones, and you need a delivery plan that's costed for that. And then number 4, bring that all together into a national monitoring system action plan. Next slide, please. And then the guidance had a section on relevant information resources, organizations and tools around this subject, national monitoring. Next slide. So then just to remind you, please do send us your feedback to this, and where you can also download the document. Really helpful to us. Next slide. And there's also some other materials being produced to complement this. UNDP are leading technical guidance on using spatial data to support the development of plans for national monitoring systems. Next, that'll be available in March. Next slide, please. And the sections in this guidance are here. So it's looking particularly at each indicator where spatial data can support its calculation and use, and provides guidance as well on how to identify national spatial data for that and validate it. And it introduces new features that are available through the UN Biodiversity Lab tool for supporting this. Next slide, please. And also with the other components, the DART tool is available to help with documenting your indicators and linking them with other processes. The UN Biodiversity Lab and its functions for data collection and also data set on restoration are available. Next slide, please. And we are offering as well an online course on using spatial data for biodiversity, which is coming up soon. There's a webinar already available on developing a monitoring action plan, which we did in last November, and another one coming up in April on using spatial data to support GBF monitoring. Next slide, please. These courses are available on the Learning for Nature website. And next slide, please. The webinar we already did in November, the recordings are available there. They introduce the guidance further. So they're available on the NBSAP forum. Next slide, please. And so to finish, for technical support, we invite you to please contact us via this email, and we'll do our best to respond on your draft materials or questions and so on that you may have regarding developing national monitoring plans. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Philip. Once again, if there are any immediate questions for Philip, I see there's one that's just popped up in the chat about difficulty in reviewing indicators and assessing them because they weren't identified in the previous MBSAP. I don't know if you have any quick response on that, Philip. Otherwise, maybe we can return to that later in the discussion.
Let's do that at the end.
Okay. Okay, sure. All right, thanks very much for the question, Sharon. We will come back to that when we have our open discussion. Right now we have our final presentation on the overview of technical support for component 4, which will be delivered by Pierre Lanfranco, who is the global technical environmental finance analyst with BioFin. Go ahead, Pierre. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. Like Tanya said, I'm Pierre Lanfranco. I'm working with the BioFin global team, and I will just give you a brief introductions to the different technical resources that BioFin can offer to countries, to stakeholders to implement this component 4 of the early action support, but also, and you will see about this new GBF-EAS project to design the biodiversity finance plan. So in the next slide, we can see a bit how the presentation will be conducted. So we just have 2 parts, like this review of technical resources. And after, I will try to speak a bit and explain the link between the different GBF projects that we can see in the ecosystem. So in the next slide, it was just an overview of the different targets of the GBF. So we discussed it already a lot, but just to let you know and just to underline highlights, and all these targets will need a lot of financing resources and a lot of resources to be implemented and to reach these targets. So we can think about the target 3, for example, 3% of land and seas protected will need a lot of resources, financing resources. So that's why biodiversity finance is really important. But we can see for the first time in the CBD framework, then 4 targets have an explicit link with the biodiversity finance, which is target 15, 16, 18, and 19. So I just want to highlight this to give a bit of context and background information. And in the next slides, we can see just, I will go step by step, and it's of course just an introduction. It's really up to you, and with a link that is going to be shared in the chat to dig a bit deeper, but I can just give you an overview of all the different technical resources available at the moment and provided by BioFin. So we'll go step by step, and we'll start with the BioFin workbook in the next slide, where we should understand that this is the main product of BioFin. And it's explained really step by step how to implement the BioFin methodology and how to design a biodiversity finance plan. And you can see on the right, then we have the different steps of the methodology, and it's matching perfectly with the different activity in the component 4 of this early action support. So it's if you want to have guidance and understand exactly how to implement these different steps, you can download the workbook. It's available in English, in Russian, French, and Spanish. It's on the website, and I think the link will be shared in the chat. and you can understand exactly how to do a policy and institutional review, which is the first report of the biofield methodology, a biodiversity expenditure review, a financial need assessment to understand exactly what are the resources needed to implement the NBSAP, for example. And after, thanks to all these assessments, you will be able to design the biodiversity finance plan, which is, by the way, underlined in target 19 of the GBF. Then each country needs to design and develop their biodiversity finance plan. And in this biodiversity finance plan, each country will be able to identify and prioritize specific finance mechanism, what we call finance solutions, to be implemented to close the biodiversity finance gap and to make sure that country has enough resources to implement the NBSAP and to reach their national targets at this level. So I really invite you to look at this workbook, and we made some videos available as well on our Biofin YouTube channel, which is explained briefly the different steps of the methodology, and really invite you to look at it. And I think you can go on the next slide, just to click, because we have for each product we explain that this can support all the targets, and you can go next slide. Yeah, exactly. And here with a more explicit link with target 15, 16, 18, and 19. So now we can move on to the next slide and to the next resources and knowledge product. And I think it's really linked to this workbook and this methodology, because on our website, we have a catalog, online catalog of 160 finance solutions. So everyone can refer to that, go and check the catalog, and it will help. It will be a starting point for each country to design their biodiversity finance plan. They will start with this catalog, 160 finance solutions, and after with consultation with technical committee, with steering committee, they will implement a scoring system and an exercise. Once again, explained in the biofield methodology, we will be able to prioritize between 5 to 15 finance solutions really relevant for the national context and to be implemented at the short or medium term to close the biodiversity finance gap. And you can see in this catalog, so we have many different finance solutions, and that's why it's important to open the scope and not to focus only on the most, let's say, innovative tools, because sometimes we can see that it's really important as well to do some basic finance solutions. Let's say, for example, improving budgeting at the Ministry of Environment level, for example, it's really important. And we have this kind of finance solutions described, explained in this catalog, and it helps countries after to prioritize them. In the next slide, I will just introduce you. Oh, yes, exactly. It supports all the 23 targets. And in the next slide again, you can see that based on the Biofin workbook, and which explain all the methodology, we develop a MOOC, so a massive online courses, and I think everyone can access it. So I will invite you also, if you're interested in the methodology and into biodiversity finance, to really look at it. So far, we have more than 6,000 people who have already been enrolled to understand and learn about the Biofin methodology and how to develop biodiversity finance plan and how to implement them as well. So, and just for your information, we are in the process now to updating this MOOC. So, because we are updating the workbook, so the last editions of the workbook was 2018, and now we are developing the 2024 editions of the workbook, which is being released soon. And based on that, we're going to launch this new MOOC as well for everyone to learn and get a certificate at the end to be like an expert on biodiversity finance. And you can, Anthony, you can go click forward, because it explains then the targets, which target is supported by this tool, which is target 23, the 23 targets, I mean, all the targets, but also always with this explicit link with biodiversity finance in target 15, 16, 18, and 19. On the next slide, and I think this one is like the most recent knowledge product, because it has been launched just last week, last Thursday. Biofin team developed these guidelines on the subsidies who are harmful to nature. And it explains step by step how to identify and assess the subsidies to understand exactly the impact on biodiversity, on social and also economic impacts. It explains as well how to define multiple redesign options and to take in considerations social, gender equality, and environmental, as well as economic and political criteria and components. And also it explains how to support the formulation of action plan. So the idea is to identify which subsidies are harmful to nature and what could be the options to improve these subsidies to make them greener or at least reduce the impact on biodiversity. So we launched that in a webinar last week on Thursday, and now these guidelines are freely available. So far it's only in English, but we're working at the moment in translations in Russian, Spanish, and French. So it will be available really soon. But we made videos as well to help countries to at least understand the topic and the context. And these videos are already available on the YouTube channels in English, French, Spanish, and Russian. And we also have the recording of the webinar of last week. If you want to dig a bit deeper in the topic, we have some high-level speakers who present and launch this event, and it will be really important. And for the targets 18, and Anthony, you can click forward because we can see the target 18 of this GBF is really focusing on subsidies, and this guidelines is supposed to really help countries to implement the first activity. We have already a lot of biofin countries doing this assessment, and we have now even a new generation of country who move a step further, who did the assessment and now want to go deeper in the implementation of a redesign and action plan to implement this new action plan. So we'll go on the next slide and the next resources provided by Biofin as well. And this one is quite recent as well. It has been launched last year. It's the Finance Resource Database for Biodiversity, what we call FIRE. So it's already available, freely accessible on the Biofin website. And it's really helped this tool, this database really helps to close the financing gap for biodiversity conservations by listing 300 funding opportunities around the world. So the resources of both public and private, and it should be seen as a one-stop shop where a project owner who can find in one place a multiple of different opportunities matching a specific criteria with this project or her project. So for example, you can use the filters, and you can use the country, the range of funding, the type of funding as well, because it's not only grants, but it can be equity or loans. And like that, you can really use in one place to have all these different funding opportunities. We have 308 resources available now in this database, but we are still working on it. And we are aiming to really to have like a broad database here where every project owner can identify the best funding resources for his project. And now we have 3,000 single viewers up to date. And we have also a LinkedIn page specifically on this tool where you can follow the new and recent funding resources. We sometimes call date for call for proposal, etc., etc. So I really invite you to look at the platform, but also to join the LinkedIn community on this. Maybe subscribe to the newsletter, etc., etc., to make sure if you're a project owner to be sure to know about this and all the new opportunities. And you can go one click further because it will support the target 19 in mobilizing finance for the GBF. In the next slide, we're going to focus a bit more on the private sectors because we know that the global economy depends heavily on the functioning ecosystem for food, fuel, fibers, climate regulations, water resource, etc., etc. And it's really impacts the private sectors. But also it's well understood that the private sector should be responsible for offsetting its impact on the environment. But also we should highlight that the private sector is benefiting as well from biodiversity. So we developed this knowledge product who help countries to engage with the private sectors. So we have the Moving Mountains reports launched by Biofin to understand the big picture about how to involve the private sectors in biodiversity finance and which actor can be involved. So it's really a guidelines to explain how to engage the private sector in the countries. And also in the second report, is in the middle in green, we developed this with UNEP-FI as well. and is to understand exactly understanding how can corporate finance support the delivery of the GBF, and including how we can shift harmful financial flow, how can policymakers unlock more private finance domestically, and what options are available to regulate the financial sectors vis-a-vis of biodiversity. And after we develop also a third report and knowledge product to understand exactly the institutional readiness needed and potential entry points to develop and scale the landscape of nature financial disclosure and the related existing gap in the country. So you might hear about TNFD, and the idea here is to understand exactly, to make an assessment at the country and to understand exactly what is the maturity of this activity in the country and what are the gaps and maybe next step to implement in the country to engage with the financial sectors in this topic. And maybe, okay, you can go one slide further, one click further. It's like just to explain the targets supported by this. So target 15, 16, and 19. And after you can go on the next slide, and it will be my last slide, at least for this first component, is just to explain that we have this Biofin website, and it should be seen as really a hub, a knowledge hub, where you can find a lot of information into it, and always linked to the biodiversity finance. So we have, for example, news and country experiences article available on the website. For example, on the screen, you can see that Sri Lanka launched really recently certifications for tourism sectors, and he explains this. In Egypt, colleagues work as well on a depth SWOT in Egypt for environmental product, etc., etc. We have also an article on how the insurance product can be supported for biodiversity conservations, and we have a lot of examples. So it should really be seen as a hub for knowledge, and I really invite everyone to have a look on the web side of Biofin. And Anthony, I think you can go one click further, and just to explain to you as well and to the participants, then on the website, Biofin website, each country has a dedicated page. And if you're interested in these countries, you can click on it and see what are the kind of reports and resources available for this country. So at the moment, we're working in 41 countries. So you have the 41 countries on the screen, and you can click on it and see, for example, the biodiversity finance plan or the biodiversity expenditure review, financial need assessment, etc., and see exactly and learn more on which finance solutions are implemented thanks to Biofin support. And you can go on the next slide to click, I think, to understand that it support all the 23 targets, and always with this explicit link on target 15, 16, 18, and 19. Okay, I will stop here for the resources, and I think you can go one slide further as well. And now I just want, and it will take just 5 minutes, just to make sure that everyone understand the link between these different GEF opportunities you have on the screen. So we have the GBF-7 early action support, just to initiate the activities around biodiversity finance and updating the NBSAP. We have now, which has been launched in January, the GBF-8 umbrella program for biodiversity finance plan. So each country 91 countries receive 300,000 USD to design their biodiversity finance plan following the Biofin methodology. So it has been done. Communication has been sent to countries, and the work will start really soon. So the idea will be to start the activity of the GBF-7 early action support on component 4, and all the activity will to initiate the activities, but all the plans, the biodiversity plans and EV assessments will be done in the context of the GBF-8 umbrella program for biodiversity finance. And to understand exactly, then we have this third GBF-8 opportunities, and I think it's like 450,000 USD, something like that, to support countries to update their NBSAP and design their 7th national report. So I just want to make sure that everyone are aware of this linked between the different projects, and I think you can go one slide further. And I just want on this slide explain and a bit explain how the BFP, so the Biodiversity Defense Plan, are really linked and let's say work together with the NBSAP. Because at the moment, the timeline are quite related, and we can see that countries are developing at the same time biodiversity defense plan and updating their NBSAP. But I think it should be seen as an opportunity, because all on the left, you can see the different steps of the biodiversity defense plan. So the policy and institutional review, the biodiversity expenditure review, financial need assessment, and biodiversity defense plan. And all these steps then country will do by developing their biodiversity defense plan, so with the early action support project, but also with the GBF-EAS umbrella program for BFPs. All these steps will allow countries to develop and generate data, will be super useful for updating their NBSAP. So, for example, you can see on the right all the data that will be created by the BFP, by designing the BFP, which will be super helpful for updating the NBSAP to get targets. For example, when we take the example of harmful subsidies, doing the assessment suggested by Biofin and following Biofin guidelines, if the country do that, they will have a clear targets for in their NBSAP for target 18, because they will be able to target the right subsidies to reform, and some have important data on this as well to integrate in the NBSAP. So it should be really seen as complementary. And the NBSAP will be able also to integrate some financial solutions, finance components will be helpful for the implementation of the BFP. So you can go one step further, I think, and just to summarize, an NBSAP and BFP are mutually supportive, and there are several connecting opportunities that can result in wider stakeholders engagement, for example, increase ambitions and improve outcomes. And in many Biofin teams, countries, the teams are closely working with the governments to support the NBSAP updating process based on the Biofin methodology, and as I explained to you, based on the data that are generated by the design of the BFP. And I think we can go one slide further, and it will be my last slide, and a quick one. It's just because I already underlined this, it's just to understand these three different components of the GEF. So the early action support, the umbrella project for biodiversity defense plan that each country will design thanks to the support of the GEF, and it will be launched anytime soon. And this GBF-EAS opportunity on the NBSAP to update the NBSAP and to develop the national reports. So we should understand that all these components have been designed together, and these projects are mutually supportive and work together. So I think it's my last slide, Anthony, if you can go just to confirm. So I can stop here, Tanya, and let me know if you have any questions or remarks. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Pierre. And yes, I think we can take any immediate questions right now. That would be the start of our open Q&A. So either if you have questions for Pierre on Biofin's plans, or questions for any of the other panelists on the different components, please feel free to put your questions in the chat or raise your hand, and you can speak on the screen or in the Zoom. I may just go back to see, I know there were some questions that were raised earlier, some of which we were going to come back to. So I'm just going to take a look at those while we wait for any other questions that may come up. I noticed that there's a few comments around the timing of the EAS project, that things, considering how long it's taken for the GBF even to be negotiated, that this doesn't leave as much time for this project. I mean, I think following on what Pierre was saying in terms of the next steps of GEF support and the other support, this project shouldn't be seen in isolation. I think it's an important kind of process to begin and to have underway, and to lead to the further steps, which will be the revision of NBSAP. So I think, while there is some time pressure for this, it's also coming from the commitments that were set for COP16, which are to have at least the national targets aligned with the GBF. So if the MBSAP cannot be revised by then, there is an acceptance of that may take more time. But I think in that respect, you know, there will be elements of this project that may need to continue beyond that time. I know that there was another question that was raised earlier about guidelines and tools in Russian. I believe we do have some in Russian, as Pierre mentioned. This latest product from BioFin will be available in Russian. I'm not sure that we have all of the tools that have been prepared in Russian. Only for the majority, I think that they have been translated into French and Spanish. Or otherwise in English, but they are not all available in Russian to my knowledge. So perhaps if you can get back to us with the specific guidelines you are looking for, and we can see if they're not available, if there's any other option we can provide on that. And let's see, I think there was a question also on indicators that was following your presentation. Philip, about the challenges in developing indicators because they were not identified in the previous MBSAP. I don't know if you have any suggestions or tips. I think that may be a little more difficult to provide on a where it's a more specific case, but please go ahead, Philip. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Sharon, for your question. It sounds like if you don't have any indicators identified yet already, that could say, well, that's an opportunity then to see what indicators you already do have around the subject of biodiversity in your country, which may be produced for other agreements. Most countries, for example, have information on protected areas, perhaps on their threatened species or red list species, on coverage of forests or a few ecosystems. There's often at least some basic data like that's available. The Global Biodiversity Framework is very big in its scope and the targets, and it's calling for having targets and indicators on perhaps some new subjects. So many countries may be looking as well to develop some new indicators for perhaps new targets and subjects that they're including in their NBSAP. In the guidance materials we produce, we offer some suggested steps for doing this, starting with looking at the monitoring framework of the Global Biodiversity Framework and its headline indicators, which all countries are requested to use if they can, and then the component and complementary indicators to support that. And then, as I suggest, looking target by target in your NBSAP, which how would you measure that? Are there existing indicators available? Would you be wanting to develop new indicators? And a national monitoring system plan is a plan of how you would fill these gaps. So it's partly what indicators we already have that we want to continue to use, but also identifying needs and how you would fill those needs. And that does also link into the component 4 work on costing that work. So developing your capacity to have indicators, have an organized monitoring system. If you can cost that, that can link in into the financing plan. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Philip. I hope that helps answer some of your questions, Sharon. I see that there's another question that's been put in the chat on indicators of the GBF targets that have not been developed so far and the challenges that creates for alignment. So if you can respond on that at all, Philip.
Yeah, no, this is a big challenge that the monitoring framework isn't complete yet, that actually the majority of targets, they're not yet headline indicators which are fully developed with data and methods available for national use. There is an ongoing process to address this and fill the gaps through an ad hoc technical expert group on indicators, which was set up by COP15 and will be reporting at the next Substar. So over the year, I think there will be some progress on filling those gaps. And we at UNEP WCMC with the Secretariat of the CBD are looking to be able to see if we can provide more information on those indicators as it's available. In reality, if the headline indicator is not yet ready for use, you may want to look at then what national indicators you have or what other indicators might be suitable in the component and complementary indicators in the monitoring framework. If you're struggling with this, please do get in touch with us at monitoring support email, and we may be able to provide some more sort of country by country specific advice.
Great. Thanks very much again, Philip. I see that Natasha, who also is your colleague at UNEP World Conservation Monitoring Center, has noted in the chat that the political process adopted to finalize the indicators will provide final versions of the metadata for the headline indicators for the CBD Substa 26 meeting, which is in May of this year. So not too long away at this point. Maybe we have time for another question or two. I don't see any others right now in the chat, so I would raise one that's maybe related to indicators, but also funding. So perhaps you could answer, Pierre, how do we get funds for indicators and monitoring?
It's good questions. I think it would be okay, and maybe I will try to reply, but I think it's part when we do the biodiversity defense plan with biofuel methodology, we do the costing of the activities. So if a country is developing a monitoring and evaluation plan, really a detailed one, maybe biofin, with the methodology of biofin, countries will be able also to cost the need to implement this monitoring and evaluation framework, and after design maybe finance solutions to mobilize the funding needed to implement the monitoring and evaluation. So we don't have funding right now, but I think it's really a process for countries to integrate this monitoring and evaluation process in the NBSAP, and to make sure after we have funding available and resources available to implement this M&E framework. So I think it's all part of the biofuel methodology also to provide the cost and the solutions for that. We don't have one solutions because we have 160 finance solutions available, and after it's up to the country to prioritize and identify which is the best finance solution for in the national context to mobilize the resources for activities which it can integrate this M&E framework as well.
Great, thanks very much. And I think that's a good maybe reminder note to end on, that this is an ongoing process and it requires efforts in a lot of different directions in order to kind of have the framework in place to be able to respond to or align with the GBF at the national level and really be able to implement once the plan is in place. So I think with that, we are at the end of this session for today, and I'd like to thank all of you who have attended and participated and spoken as presenters for your time and your participation in the webinar today. Before concluding, I would like to express thanks to the GEF for providing funds for this project, the Early Action Support Project, and to our partners at UNDP, UNEP, UNEP WCMC, and CBD for all of the joint work in this GEF project. Many thanks again to all the presenters for providing useful information on the technical guidance available through the project. And for further discussion with the global teams, please see the emails that are now on the screen. And also a reminder, you can find all of the recordings, presentations, and the Q&A document of previous webinars on the webinar page, which my colleague is putting in the chat, or should be putting in the chat. Hopefully very soon. So thank you very much. And I think we just need that extra link in the chat. Hopefully it will be available shortly. And with that, I'll just thank you and wish you a good rest of day. Thank you.